Hey guys, in today's video, I'll be showing you how to deploy a Flask app to Heroku. So to follow along with me in this video, you need to have a Heroku account and a GitHub account. And also you need some app to deploy. So I'll be deploying this app that I created in the last video, but this can be any app that you've created before. So the process that I'm going to take in this video is doing things until there's an error, so we can see how to handle the various errors that come up when you go to deploy something on Heroku. So instead of doing everything correctly the first time around, I'll show you how to debug things as you try to deploy your app until we eventually get to the state where our app has been deployed. So let me give you a quick overview of this particular app. It's a question answer app, and basically it allows you to ask questions and give answers. So you have three types of users. You have an admin user, you have an expert, which receives questions, and then you have regular users that ask questions. So here, 3 questions have already been asked. I can ask a new question, I can select an expert, and then when I log in as the expert, I can see the questions that have been asked, and I can answer those questions. So that's just a quick overview of the app. And here's what the code looks like. So I have some files outside of the project directory. So I have a .env, I have a Flask env, and I have the pip file in the pip file lock. So I install things using pip-env, and I have that running right now. So let's get started with putting this on Heroku. So I have my Heroku dashboard open. This is what you would see as soon as you create an account. And I'll click new and then create new app. So I'll give this app a name, and I'll call this Flask-QA-deploy. And I'll just create it like that. Okay, so here we have the option of selecting a deployment method. So we can use Heroku Git, but in this video, I want to use GitHub because that means there's only one place we need to push our code to. With Heroku Git, you'd have to push to both GitHub and Heroku if you were using GitHub. But in the GitHub case, Heroku will detect your app every time you push to a certain branch. So now that I have this, you can go ahead and connect your GitHub account here. I already have mine connected, so I can't connect again. But basically, it's like a button that you will hit, and then a pop-up will show up that allows you to log into GitHub. And then once it does, you have your GitHub account here. So I'll go ahead and create a new repo, and this is going to be for my project. And I'll call this one Flask-QA deploy as well. I'll make this private, and I'll create repository. So I have the instructions here, and if you're not familiar with Git, you can just follow those instructions. So just make sure you are in the outermost directory of your project. So my code lives here, but I'm actually in this directory. So if I list the files, we see the pip file lock, and then we see the actual app files there. So this is the directory that I want to be in, and I'll just run the command. So I really don't need a README for this example, but you can create a README if you want. So you would start with the git init. So I'll just paste that there. And then we need to commit all of the files. So you can skip the add README because I'm not creating the README. So we need to add all the files. And actually we need to do git add and then period to add all the files. And then we do git commit -m. So you should see all the files that are in your project. So after that, you can do the remote add origin. And then finally git push -u origin master. And then you just put in your username. So mine is Anthony@prettyprinter.com. And I'll put in my password. And then once it pushes to the repo, you will see your code here. So this is the exact same code that I have here in VS Code. So now that I have this, I can connect Heroku to it. So Flask-QA deploy. So just type in the name of the repo that you just created and hit search. And we see it here. So I'll just click connect. And now what we want to do is we want to enable automatic deploys. So anytime you push to the master branch on GitHub, which is the only branch we have at the moment, then it will automatically restart your app and build any changes that have been made in the code. So I'll click that. And then we can also deploy the branch manually now, because it won't detect the deploy until I actually push, but I have nothing to push at the moment. So I'll deploy it manually. And once this happens, we'll see what errors we get. So looking at the log here, because I'm using the pip file, it's detecting the version of Python that I use, so 3.7.3, and then it installs the things that I need for this particular app. So the dependencies are coming from the pip file. If you just open that, you can see what's being used. So Click, Flask, Flask Login, Flask SQL Alchemy, and so on. So it's just installing all of those things so we can actually run the app through Heroku. So this only takes a moment. Okay, so it says it's done and then it's launching. So it gives us a URL to open. So you can also click this link up here, open application, and then we see application error. So we did the first step, but it doesn't work yet. So to see what the error is, we can go to more here and then go to view logs. And this log will tell us some information about what's going wrong. So if we look here, this is basically the error. So it says no web processes running. So what that means is, although we have our code on Heroku now, there's nothing to actually start up a server for us. So to do this, we have to create something called a proc file. So a proc file is what Heroku uses to determine how to run your app. So to create a proc file, just put it in the same directory that you started with. So proc file, so capital P, ROCFILE. And in here, what you want to do is first you want to specify the type of worker. So it's going to be a web worker. And then you want to specify what goes after this. So before I can specify this, I need to think like, what is going to run my app? So we need something called an application server. So the application server is going to be gunicorn. So we have to install that in our project. So I'll do pip inv install gunicorn. And this is what's actually going to run our app. So Heroku is going to call gunicorn, and then gunicorn is going to run our code. Okay, so now that we have that installed, we need to finish our proc file. So the worker is going to be a web worker. So we just type the word web and then a colon, and then followed by the command that we want to run. So gunicorn. And then we need to tell gunicorn where our app is. So before I can do that, I need to actually get the app, because in my app here, if I go to dunder.init, I'm using create app. So there's nowhere where my app object actually exists. So I need to grab it first. So in the same directory as the proc file, what I'll do is I'll create another file and I'll call it wsgi.py. So WSGI is just a standard file name that you will use for a Python web app. So it's just basically the interface to web servers for Python. So what I want to do here is I want to import that create app function from Flask Q&A. So from Flask_Q&A, and I can import from Flask Q&A directly because I have the dunder.init. I want to import the create app function. And then I need to create the app object. So app is just going to equal create app, just like that. So then if I go back to my proc file, that's what I'm going to reference. So I'm going to reference the WSGI file first, followed by a colon, and then the name of the object in that file. So the object is app. So what I can do is I can commit these changes with git. So added proc file. And then I can push again. So this is being pushed to GitHub and it just finished. So if I go back to the home page, if you look on the right-hand side, we see that it is building right now. So build in progress. So we just have to wait a moment for this to finish. And once it does, we can try reloading our app to see what happens. And hopefully we don't have any errors, but I'm almost certain that we will have at least one error. Okay, so we see the build succeeded. So let's try running our app again. So this time, things have changed. So it no longer says application error, but this time it says internal server error. So this is good because this can only occur if the Flask app is running. So let's go back to our log. So view logs, and we can see what the error is. So if we just look here, we see attribute error, none type object has no attribute driver name. So that basically means the database isn't set up correctly. So if we go back to the code, if we look here, our configuration is in this .env file, but this .env file only gets loaded when we run Flask run. It doesn't get loaded when we deploy to Heroku. So we have a couple of options. We can use the existing SQLite database on Heroku, or we can create a new database on Heroku. So the reason why I want to create a new database on Heroku is just because of the way the file system works. So SQLite databases are files, and anytime you make changes to your database, it updates the file. But the thing about Heroku is the files don't always stay in the same place. They may disappear, they may come back. There's no certainty that a particular file is always going to be there on your server just because of the way Heroku works. So that's problematic when you have a SQLite database because you need that file to always be there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new database on Heroku, a Postgres database. So if I go back to overview, and then I go to configure add-ons here, and then search. I'm going to search for Postgres, and then we can see it here. So Heroku Postgres, I'll click it, and then I'll just use the free one and say provision. And it's going to attach this database to my app. So we know this is working when we can go to settings and then reveal config vars. And we see a database URL here, and we see some information there. So if you click edit, you can see all of the information for that particular database. It's hosted on AWS. And we see the config value is database underscore URL. So what we want to do is we want to modify our app to take in that database URL. So if we go to our settings, we see it's looking for a value called SQL Alchemy Database URI in the environment, but this is called database URL. So to make it work with Heroku a little bit better, we'll change this to database URL. And then we'll also do the same in the .env. So when we run this locally, it still works. So this will be database URL instead of SQL Alchemy database URL. But note that it's still going to get put into SQL Alchemy at the end of the day. It's just getting the environment variable database URL and putting that into the SQL Alchemy database URI. So what we can do now is we can deploy this latest version and see if it works. So git add all. Okay, so if we go back to overview, we should see things updating here. So we see the last two things that happened where the database was created and it was attached to our app. But in just a moment, we should see the build part display here, and it does. So we'll just wait for this to finish building. Okay, so it's done. So let's try running our app again. I'll refresh, and we still get an error. So let's make sure that the error is different. So we'll go to view logs. And this time it says no module name PG2. So we need to install this because this is required to connect to the database. So I'll go ahead and install it. So let me copy this and just install it with pip inv install. And we'll go ahead and install it. So now that it's installed, we'll save the changes and deploy to GitHub again. So add it. And then we will wait for it to build. Okay, so it's done. So let's try running the app again. And it still fails. So let's look at the logs. Okay, so this one, it says relation question does not exist. So it seems we have the database set up correctly. It's just that this table doesn't exist in the database. And that's actually correct because we haven't created the tables in the database. So for this particular app, I have a command called create table. So what this does is it will create all the tables that don't exist in the database. So because I have a new database, none of my tables exist yet. So what I want to do is I want to run this command. So I could run this command locally, but I'd have to bring in the configuration for the Postgres database locally. So instead, what I'll do is I'll run this command on Heroku. So normally the command would simply be this. So Flask and then create underscore tables, just like that. But I don't have the Postgres configuration on my local machine. So I'll run this on Heroku. So to do that, we can go to more here and then run console. And then we simply type in the command that we want to run. So we're going to type in that Flask and then create tables and run. And it just has to fire everything up. And then it will run that command. And if there are no errors, then really nothing should display. If there are errors, then we'll see the error messages in the log. But we see process exited, so we can close out. And we see we have the same log information here. So everything should be okay. So now if I try running the app again, let's see what happens. Okay, so we see that things are working here. We can actually see the app. We can go to different pages, so the register page and the login page. So now what we want to do is we want to create the admin user. So if you watch the video where I created this app, I made it to where I can easily create an admin user by modifying the code. So if I go to main here, actually auth, when I create a user, I just need to manually set this to true to create an admin user and then set it back to false when I'm done creating an admin user. So I'll add this. And then I'll wait for it to redeploy on Heroku. So I'll just wait for the status to come up. And then of course I'll wait for it to finish building. Okay, so it's done. So I'll reload the app. And everything still works. So I'll create a user called Anthony, and Anthony will be the admin user. I'll hit register. And then I need to log in as Anthony. So Anthony, and then I'll put in the password that I just created. And now I'll get another error. So let's see what this error is if we go to view logs again. Okay, so we see the session is unavailable because no secret. So that means we need a secret key. So if we go to our configuration here, we have the database URL and we have a secret key. But on Heroku, we don't have a secret key, so we can create one. So in our environment, we're just creating a value called secret_key. So we can just create this here. So secret. And we can make the secret key anything. So I'll just type in some random values and hit add. And then I'll try that again. So I will try logging in with Anthony. And now I'm logged in. I can see the user setup page. So now let's see if everything works with the app. So I'll create an expert. And I meant to hit register. So expert and then password. I'll log in as the expert just to make sure I can. And I'm still logged in as the admin. So let me log out and then log in as expert. Or actually, no. What happened was I'm still creating admin users. So this last step, I'll go to false. And then I will deploy this one more time. So set admin to false. And then we just need to wait for the app to deploy one last time, and then we can go ahead and check to see that everything is working properly in our app. Okay, so now if we go back and we create a new user, so let's say programming expert. Okay, so now I'll log in as the admin user. So Anthony. Now I'll go to user setup and I see programming expert. So I'll promote programming expert to an expert. I'll log out and I'll create a user that will ask a question. And log in with that user. Ask a question. Can I ask you a question? And we see the programming expert here. We don't have any other experts, so there's just one. We hit submit. We'll log out and then log in as a programming expert. And password. No answered questions yet, but if I go to unanswered questions, I can click on the one question and answer it. So can I ask you a question? Yes. Submit. And now if we go home, we can see the one question that was asked. So that's it. We have our app deployed on Heroku now. So we see I have this URL from Heroku, and I also have it on my local machine. So of course you can set up the process any way you want. You can have the same configuration on your local machine and Heroku. You can do things differently on the two. It just depends on you. So deployment can get really complicated, but in this video, I just want to cover the simplest case because for most people, they just want to get their app online so they can show other people in the beginning. And then once they decide they want to have more users, then they can think of more complicated deployment options. So I'll have this code in the description below, so you can just click on the link to get the code. If you have any questions about deploying on Heroku, feel free to ask me. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.